One of the most critical things when installing a mini split or a VRF system is making a good quality flare. When making a good quality flare, there's several steps that need to be followed, and proper tools will help you make a good solid connection. We're going to go ahead and demonstrate those procedures here. Now, while this is not the field, there's going to be some differences in how you do it here. The basic fundamental principles will still exist. One of the most important things you need to start with is a good tubing cutter. You're going to want to have various sizes of these. From a large one to the small little imp cutters, you're going to want to make sure you have one for the various sizes, because sometimes you have to go around obstacles in the system that a larger tubing cutter won't make. It's also important to have an extremely sharp wheel and replace these wheels on a regular basis. If you don't, you're going to end up with imperfections in your copper tubing. Even a flare like this that looks good can have imperfections like these dimples right here, made from a nick from a bad tubing cutter. We want to avoid those because those could be stress points that could eventually crack or cause us a leak in the refrigeration system. So let's go ahead and start by making our cut. So we've got a piece of copper here. The important thing to do is put your tubing cutter on and tighten up the wheel till it snugs up with the copper tubing. Once it's snugged up, not tight, just barely on there, make your first turn, and with every turn, tighten the wheel up a little bit more. This will make sure that you don't concave or bend the tubing in. With a little experience, this goes a lot faster. Now that we've made the cut, you can notice around the pipe we have some burrs and nicks. If we don't remove those when we make our flare, we're going to have imperfections. The flare won't seat tightly against the valve. We'll have leaks, or in worst case situations, those burrs will knock themselves loose and work their way into the system. To solve that, you need a good deburring tool. Several styles are out there. My personal favorite is the pen style. When you deburr the pipe, you're going to want to make sure to put the deburring tool inside and make a circular motion around the pipe. However, if I were to deburr just like this, all the deburring and all the shavings of the copper would fall naturally back into the copper pipe and into the system. So you always want to make your deburrs in a downward angle. And as we do that, you'll actually be able to see the burrs fall right out of the copper. And they'll leave us with a nice smooth edge. If you go and deburr this too much, you can thin out the wall of the copper, which will lead to stress cracks as well. Now that you've got the pipe cut, you're ready to use it. The most important step after that is to make sure you put the flare nut on. There's nothing more frustrating than making a flare only to find that the flare nut's still sitting on the ground. Next, you're going to need your flaring tool. Now there's several types out there. What we recommend is an eccentric style flaring tool designed for refrigeration. Automotive style flaring tools will not make the proper angle on your flare. You need a 45-degree flare. This flaring block here has the ability to pop open. You can find the copper size that you need. Before we do that, let's slide this stop out of the way. Find the size copper that you need, place it in there. Now the copper does need to extend above the flaring block a certain amount so you can make the right size cone. That's what this does. This is a stop to let you know when you've got the copper set to the proper height. So simply slide the stop up over the fitting, slide the copper up until it deadheads, and once it deadheads, tighten the flaring block down, push that out of the way. So now slide the clutch of your flaring block to the proper position. You'll notice on the sides there's knockouts where the flare block can tighten into, and tighten it down. Now with this style flaring tool, you notice that the flaring shaft will come down in an eccentric manner, meaning that it'll orbit and wobble around. This is going to allow you to make a good, nice flare connection. You'll tighten it down, and you really want a flaring block that has a clutch that will automatically disengage the flaring block or the cone once the flare has been made. You hear the snap? The clutch has been released. Now, back the flaring cone out. Loosen up the adjustment. And you can now slide your flared pipe out of your flaring block. The next thing you're going to want to do is use your flare gauge to check that the flare is properly sized. The way this will work is that you'll stick the copper into the flaring gauge, and if it does not pass through the opening, then you've made a proper size cone. Obviously, that one didn't turn out the way we wanted. So let's take a look at one that did. So we went ahead and cut off the flare and remade it. Now let's see if the cone is the right size. Notice it does not go through the flaring gauge. That means that the cone of the flare is the proper size to fit on our service valve. The next thing you want to do before installing the flare is use a synthetic oil, any synthetic oil that you want, and put a small coat of lubrication on the outside diameter of the pipe. You can clean the excess off. What this is going to allow you to do is slide the flare nut down, and it'll allow it to spin freely as you tighten it up. Once you've made the flare, you would then seat the cone of the flare up against the service valve that you're connecting to, slide the flare nut over, use a torque wrench and a backup wrench to tighten this nut down to the exact torque specifications. Too little torque means that it will wiggle itself loose and you'll lose your refrigerant charge. Too much torque, you could actually crack the either flare nut or the cone of the flare and have a problem job. So this ends this tutorial on how to make a flare. Again, it comes naturally. With more practice that you do, you'll make a good solid flare. And utilizing a triple pressurization test that we'll show you in another video will help you identify if your flare is properly made or not.
For service manuals and other documentation, please visit our website at samsunghvac.com or use our Samsung HVAC mobile app to download any technical documentation. Thank you.